Is your team not performing well? Is morale low and turnover high? Are you falling further behind the competition? I'm here to help. I'm Shani Magoski, and this is the Leadershifter Show, where business strategy and culture finally meet. Explore shifts of all kinds required to build cultures of trust, engagement, and execution excellence. I promise I am not your typical boring leadership consultant, and I will help you and your team get your shift together. Hello, Leadershifters, and welcome to another episode of the Leadershifter Show with me, Shani. We have two awesome guests today. They are the founders of Think to Perform, which is a leadership development company. These two gentlemen have recently published a book whose name I love. Don't wait for someone else to fix it. 8 Essentials to Enhance Your Leadership Impact at Work, Home, and Anywhere Else That Needs You. Doug is joining us from Minnesota, and Chuck is joining us from Denver, Colorado. And as many of you know, if home is where the heart is, then Colorado is my home. So we're going to have some really interesting discussions today, how these gentlemen approach leadership, what their unique perspective is. They've been working together for over 35 years, so that in and of itself is going to bring a unique lens to the conversations that we have. And I'll say one of the things that impresses me most about this is, as they were explaining to me, they really care about what people around the world think, not just our insular little American corporate America. And they've done a lot of research around that, which we'll talk about and will be very interesting to hear. So without further ado, let me introduce Doug Lennick and Chuck Wachendorfer. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thanks, Shani.
Thanks for having us, Shani. Nice to be with you.
Great. Well, let's get right into it. And I always like to start with a little personal history and, what got you to where you are. So I guess if you could each give me just a little bit of your background and then merge it into how you two met and formed Think to Perform.
The history of this is long ago. I started my career when I was in college. I was a serial entrepreneur. I was an entrepreneurial hippie, given my age, and I started a business actually physically just one block from where I am right now. I'm right downtown Minneapolis, and about a block and a half away from here is where I started a company. And when I started that company, I also started work. I was 21 years old. I started work at IDS, what is now Ameriprise Financial, and I became
Ross Perot's company.
Yes, yeah. There you go. And so I ended up. Probably our best claim to fame is Warren Buffett. One of his earliest holdings, he bought the company back in 1952, or bought shares in the company. That is the year I was born. So I love that year for various reasons, and the Warren Buffett story. Now the company's Ameriprise, but I ended up in the financial services industry. Fast forward, I got into leadership positions. Chuck joined the company in the 1980s. That was in the 70s when I started. And then Chuck and I met probably fairly early in his career. I'm going to guess right around 85, somewhere around there. And Chuck had a storied career within the company. He was one of our high potential executives. We sent him to Harvard, where he went and their executive management program, delivered the commencement speech. So Chuck's an accomplished leader, and I did some good things along the way myself. So I'll pass it to Chuck.
That's you, Chuck.
Yeah, thanks. I'm on my third career. I got a degree in mechanical engineering, realized very quickly engineering was not for me. I was good at math. I wanted something like Doug that was going to be more entrepreneurial. So American Express Financial Advisors was hiring at that point. And I decided, since I was good at math, I might as well become a financial advisor. I was 24, 25 years old. They had a great training program. And what I learned very quickly was helping people manage their money is not necessarily about math. It's really about helping them manage their decision-making and their emotions, as you're saying. And Doug was very instrumental in bringing emotional competence to American Express. It was a brand new field. This is going back 30 years ago. And it was all about teaching people at American Express how to help manage their own emotions and how to help clients do the same. And that began my own interest in really making a difference, helping people manage their money, make great decisions. You can see I got sports memorabilia around me in my office. So at a very young age, I always admired people who manage themselves and make great decisions under pressure. And so that began my kind of interest in this field. I left American Express in 2002 and took a couple of years off with my family. We moved to Vail, moved to Edwards back then, and Doug was starting Think to Perform. So I'm not a founder. I got there as soon as I could. I got there about a year after the company started, and we really have been coaching and developing people to improve decision-making under pressure, both for themselves and also in their organizations. I've worked in real estate, technology, financial services, retail, restaurants, with businesses up in Vail, Canada, all over the United States and Europe. So it's been a great opportunity to make a positive difference, but also build a company at the same time.
Terrific. But tell us what Think to Perform, how are you differentiate? Because, we're basically in the same field. There's lots of us in this world. What's your unique approach?
What makes us different is we're very application focused. It's one thing to talk about leadership. It's another thing to actually apply it to get results. Most of us in Think to Perform have led large organizations. Doug had, I think, 12,000 people at American Express. I only had 500. But we've run up against a lot of the same issues, challenges that many of our clients, large and small, are up against. And it's difficult to change behavior. One of the things Doug likes to say is, simple is not easy. It's simple to change my behavior, but it's not easy to change my behavior. And
it's hard to shift. It's hard to shift.
Yeah,
the shift is not easy. To Chuck's point, it is simple. The concepts are simple. The actual shift is hard.
It's so funny. We sing off the same hymnal. I say it's simple but not easy all the time to my clients. But that's what makes us good at what we do.
Well, we talk about 3 levels of understanding. There's simple, there's complex, and then the third on the level we endeavor to achieve is profoundly simple. So we use the term profoundly simple. We have a goal achievement tool that we talk about in our book, Don't Wait for Someone Else to Fix It. And we talk about not just setting goals, but achieving goals. Chuck speaks to that. I mean, setting goals is easier than achieving them. Just like, and so the idea is it's a profoundly simple tool, but it's not easy because it requires behavior change. And really what we're able to do is we allow for our clients, we ask our clients to define for us what success for them looks like. Kind of using your own name, what kind of shift do you want to make? Because you're clearly wanting to get better, so that requires doing something a little bit different. And change is hard. So a lot of what we've done as a behavioral company is we've combined the science of human behavior with the practical application of that science. And our probably biggest differentiation is the practicality of what we do. One of the guys that, of course, he says nice things about him, so I use him as an example, but a guy named Arun Abey, A-B-E-Y, Arun is A-R-U-N. He is in New Zealand, Australia, and is an author himself. He refers to us and involved in the financial services industry as the world's leader in the practical application of behavioral science in financial services. But to the point that Chuck's already made and you have, the leadership principles, doesn't matter what industry you're in. We're dealing with people. And so the opportunity is to touch the potential of the people and to kind of ignite that. I always use, one of our colleagues gave me this, Bellows, as an example. because the concept is we look inside of Shaney or Chuck or Doug or whoever we're looking inside of, and what we're looking for are two things. We're looking for goodness and potential, because we all have both. And then our jobs is to fan that goodness, that potential. There's two ways to get at it. One is to beat up the rest of the body, which has some sort of a snuffing out effect. And the other is to fan the flame. So what we try to do is find it, fan it, and help that consume the body. So that's the metaphor of the bellows.
Huge metaphor person, and I will remember that.
Maybe continue on with Doug's point. That's part of what the thinking was behind the book. There's, I think, 1,500 leadership books published a year. Don't wait for somebody else to fix it is not a business leadership book. It is a leadership book. When Doug and I were thinking about this book 5-6 years ago, we wanted to write a book that, number one, stood this test of time. So books like The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, The Road Less Traveled by Scott Peck, those, The Man's Search for Meaning. Those are the kind of books we aspired to write. And number two, we wanted to write a book that anybody could use anywhere. So if you want to make a positive difference in your own life, if you want to make a positive difference in your community, your family, your organization, this is not a business leadership book, but it is a leadership book.
Yeah. And leadershipers, you've heard me say this a zillion times. Leadership is not a title or a position or status or power. It's about how you show up in the world. So I really appreciate your positioning on this book, which is even embedded in the title. Mm-hmm. So let's transition to the book now.
Sure.
It offers 8 principles.
Essentials.
Right? So
yep.
Tell us what they are. And then I've got a few of them that I'd love to drill down into just because they interest me.
Well, the book, where we start, and our tagline as a company is making the ideal real. Mm. So, and the very first essential is to aim to be your ideal self. So all of us have a real self and an ideal self. And so we put those two essentials together. The first one being aim to be your ideal self, which requires us getting to know who we are ideally. And the second essential is know your real self. And so if we just start with those two essentials, we kind of get the game moving. And so what we do with the ideal self, amongst other things, is Covey's been mentioned by Chuck. We've had the good fortune of knowing and working with both Stephen R. Covey, who's now deceased, and Stephen M.R. Covey, who endorsed our book. Stephen Covey, his father, endorsed one of the earlier books that I co-authored called Moral Intelligence. So this concept of ideal, we have an ideal self, and Covey talks about principles that apply to humankind. So do we. But we also talk about personal values, and we encourage people to get in touch with what they really care about. And in aiming to be our ideal selves, that's part and parcel to the process. So this values-based decision-making is very powerful part of our toolkit. And we would encourage your clients to just go to our website. You can do the exercise online for free. Go to thinktoperform.com. You can do it for free. The book also takes you to the exercise. You can Google it. Google personal values exercise or book, and you'll find us. But the idea is everybody has an ideal self. My values happen to be family, happiness, wisdom, integrity, service, and health. And what I aim to be is a guy who honors those values in his daily life. And that shows up in my real self, which is the second essential. And my real self is a combination of my thoughts, my emotions, and my physical experience. And we teach people how to pay attention to ourselves.
We've probably all heard the expression, maybe you have too, Shaney, that we judge ourselves by our intentions and other people judge us by our behavior. Have you heard that before?
Yes.
That distinguishes the difference between my ideal self. That's what I intend to be. But then I have my real self. And we tend to judge ourselves by our intentions. Other people judge us by our behavior. People who know us well give us the benefit of the doubt. That's not what Shaney meant to do. That's not what Chuck meant to say, right? But what we're trying to do is help people understand, who do I hope to be ideally? And then through practicing self-awareness, that's the freeze exercise that Doug mentioned. It's the freeze exercise is momentarily right now, what are you thinking? How are you feeling? What are you doing? So a thought can be we're linear thinkers. So I'm thinking about what Shaney's going to ask me next. How am I feeling? I'm excited and I'm anxious. What am I doing? I'm sitting in my chair at my desk. That practice of 5, 6, 7 times a day, freeze. What am I thinking? How am I feeling? What am I doing? Allows me to improve my self-awareness. And sometimes what I notice is I'm physically present and mentally absent. And when that happens, it affects our performance. It also affects our decision-making. So what you can know is we're hardwired to be emotionally reflexive. I talked about emotional competence earlier. That was what we got introduced to by Doug back in the 90s. Emotional competence is managing how we're feeling. But to manage how I'm feeling, I got to know how I'm feeling. That's emotional intelligence. So we're hardwired to be emotionally reflexive. So when I feel something, my body wants me to respond very quickly. And emotions sacrifice accuracy for speed. They want us to respond quickly and are usually wrong. So the worst time to make any decision, and you'll see that's one of the essentials also, is deciding wisely. The worst time to make any decision is when I'm emotional. So if I can freeze, I notice I'm upset, I can make stupid optional. It's when I don't notice that I'm getting upset that stupid becomes less optional. You know, the first 4 essentials are all about managing oneself. So it's know yourself, aim to be our ideal self. Know your real self. Integrity and responsibility. Those 2 are linked because to have integrity, I have to operate with responsibility. Empathy and compassion are linked because compassion is empathy in action. Then it's decide wisely. Those are all 4 I can practice in my own life. The next 4 are about how I lead and influence other people.
Well, and it's similar to what Covey did with the 7 habits. The first 3 being private victory habits, and the second 3 being public victory habits, and then the 7th one, sharpen the saw. So what we recognize is if anybody uses the 7 habits or our tools, and we see them as very complementary, anybody using either toolkit, if you master yourself, you win the game. This is really about self-mastery. What's happened to a lot of people is they've skipped self-mastery and they've exchanged it to learn how to, or attempt to learn how to manipulate people in a not necessarily appropriate way. I mean, so a lot of people are learning how to sell when in fact what they should learn how to do is master themselves. You know, and Chuck mentioned the things we linked. In our earlier work, and even when we talk about principles, we identify 4 principles that apply to humankind, regardless of gender, ethnicity, location on the globe. Though 2 of them happen to be integrity and responsibility. A 3rd one happens to be compassion. The 4th one is forgiveness. And the business benefit of forgiveness, incidentally, is innovation. Organizations that are unforgiving cannot innovate. So you have to be able to forgive and move on. You don't want to forgive and forget. You want to be able to forgive and move on. So we're big on forgive and remember. But the concept of, and he mentioned, and this is an important one, embracing empathy and integrity. Empathy is I actually care. And our book is don't wait for somebody else to care. There's a lot of people who feel for you. You know, I feel for you. And I really hope somebody does something, Shaney. You know, I see your pain and I really hope somebody does something. It's not going to be me, but I want you to know, I really, really hope somebody does. Maybe the government, possibly, or maybe somebody will come up and help you out. I really hope so. What we're saying is no, and Chuck said it, empathy just says, I understand. Compassion is actively putting that empathy to work. And so compassion is a principle. Empathy is an emotional competence. So we're marrying moral competencies and emotional competencies. We're marrying moral intelligence and emotional intelligence. But we recognize that our real self can be morally intelligent and morally incompetent in the same moment. Like I've actually, in my real life, and I'm approaching 72, in my real life, I can admit I have done some things that were wrong, and I knew they were wrong when I did them. That's moral intelligence and moral incompetence all at once. And what we're trying to do is help people use these tools to decide wisely, which Chuck said is one of the essentials. What's the wise decision? Well, the wise decision is morally competent, and it's morally competent and not just intelligent and emotionally competent. And that's kind of how we play the game.
Talking to colleagues who do what we do, I know others find this too, the best laid intentions. So first of all, you got to get leaders to buy in to this kind of thing. Not all of them do. And that's a separate challenge. And let's not even talk about them. Talk about the haters. Let's talk about the people who have good intentions. They believe in this. They want to change. They bring you in. They pay lots of money to coach them and to coach their teams. And then old habits die hard, and they don't make the progress that you so desperately want for them, not because you need to feel like, oh, we're good at what we do. It's like, because it's obvious you care about people and you want to make a difference and help them change. But as we said, people have to help themselves. And so I guess long preamble to, have you found any ways to really get people not just to commit, but do it, like, so that it finally sticks?
Well, it's a great question, Shani, and it's I think a conundrum that every in-person, no matter where you are in your life, you end up with, like, how did I get here? And every pattern we have in our lives is a pattern because at some point it worked for us. Mm-hmm. What happens is, as we get older, our lives change, some of those patterns hold us back. So I worked with a very successful executive about 10 years ago who hired me because he had no personal life. He made a 7-figure income, was very, very successful, and unhappy. And
successful.
Made a lot of money. But he had no personal life, didn't have a relationship. He was probably in his mid-40s, wanted to have a family. So we were noticing this pattern where he worked all the time. He would work all day long, go home, have dinner about 7 o'clock at night, go back to his home office, and literally fall asleep at his desk and wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and put himself to bed. And I was asking him about this pattern, and I said, Jeff, where did you learn that you had to work like that? So the first step in changing behavior is noticing. It's self-awareness. So I asked him, where did you learn that you had to work like that? And without any hesitation, he said, I'm dyslexic. So to get through college, I had to work 2 or 3 times harder than everybody else. So immediately he understood that's what worked for him when he was in his 20s, but he continued that pattern into his 40s. Now, so he understood where the pattern came from. That's step number 2. The third step is then you decide what, if anything, you want to do about that. And so we want to change some of the behavior a little bit at a time. Jeff was 45 years old. We're not going to change all this behavior he's practiced for the last 25 or 30 years overnight. So we started making slow little changes in how he worked. So he started to carve out more time for himself. But as we were saying before we started today, changing behavior is simple and not easy. I'm 63 years old. Doug's almost 72. We've been this way for a long time. So we got to give ourselves some grace and patience to begin changing behavior a little bit over time to a new pattern, a new way of being. And that's really what we focus on at Think and Perform.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I want to cover a little bit more ground before we end. So going back to one of the things I said during the introduction, that you really care what people around the world think. You've done some research around that and had some themes emerge. So tell us a little bit about the research and some of the key themes.
Yeah, I'll make some comments first. One of the things that we've been doing for years, we created this values card exercise. One of the people that we've been influenced by, and in fact, the guy that wrote the foreword to this book is a guy named Richard Leider, and he's the best-selling author of The Power of Purpose, and he actually had the opportunity to learn from Viktor Frankl himself. And Leider speaks to all of these kinds of topics. And if you will, we focus on trying to help people establish a sense of purpose, if you will, so that people have a reason to do what they do as we pull them into this change exercise. But the idea around the world, what we have found, and we converted, he led us into using an exercise called a calling card exercise. And that influenced us into creating the values card exercise. And that influenced us into turning the card exercise into an online exercise. And now we have data from over 100,000 people from around the world that we've captured just in the last year. So in the last year, we've had over 120,000 people complete the values exercise from 146 nations around the world. And here's what emerged, Shani. People all over the world, there's several things that come together. When we look at the top 10 values, and here's what it looks like. It appears that people all over the world value people. How do we know that? The top value in the world is family. Not just here in Minnesota, where, Lake Wobegon, we always say, Garrison Keillor, where we're all above average. Turns out everybody all over the world cares about family. 4 and 5 are friendships and relationships. 3 of the top 5 values are about people. So people value people. They value making a difference. Meaningful work and creativity are in the top 10. They value doing it the right way. Honesty and integrity are in the top 10, and they value being rewarded for it. But the reward that they're really looking for are values 2 and 3. Second most valued thing in the world is health, and the third is happiness. Turns out people all over the world would just as soon be happy as not. That really? I thought that was just Americans. No, it turns out all over the world they care.
Kids in different parts of the world, there's a lot of different definitions of happiness than Americans or Western societies have. And part of the challenge, just what we were talking about your coaching client, Chuck, is happiness earning 7 figures or 6 figures?
Right.
Well, related to that, Shani, I'll just say one thing about it, because when that came up, I wanted to add this one thing. One of the things that we say at Think to Perform is, you show me a happy person, we'll declare them successful. We don't care if they live in a castle or a tent. So This is not about your stuff. This is about how you feel. So you'll know if you're miserable. It feels miserable. That's why they call it that. You'll know. Like, I'm miserable.
I appreciate this part of the conversation so much, because that is my lived experience. I worked on Wall Street for the first third of my career. As I get older, the math starts changing. For years, I said the first half of my career, and then I started doing the math. Okay, it's not half anymore. I worked at Goldman Sachs, and by all measures, I should have been happy, right? I was earning more then in my 20s and 30s than I have ever since. I left in 2004, which is when I moved to Edwards. And I developed a whole new definition of what happiness means to me, predicated on my values, to kind of bring this full circle. Some of my key values are independence, adventure, and relationships. And so the life I created for myself post Goldman Sachs allowed me to honor all those values in a huge way. And some of my friends are like, you have this life that's so enviable. So, not to be like whatever, but one of my friends calls it the Shani factor, because not everybody is intentional to do this. I'm like, this did not fall in my lap. I have been working my whole life for what I have now, and I can say that I'm truly happy. That doesn't mean I'm happy every day, right?
And it doesn't mean life is perfect either. It's not about perfection, and it's not a lifetime achievement award yet. As you mentioned, you have to work at it, Shani. We all do.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. So any last words of wisdom before we close out?
I would just say this for your listeners today, decision-making matters. So we talked about deciding wisely. That's one of the essentials. And everything we've been talking about today drives decision-making. And here's what you can know about decision-making. Performance in any area of life. I don't care what you do for a living, where you live, color of your skin, male or female, it doesn't matter. Performance in any area of life is a function of talent, skills, and decision-making. And of the three, decision-making has twice the impact on performance than talent and skill combined. We just watched the Super Bowl yesterday here in the United States. There's 300 million people watching it. It's not always the most talented athlete on the field or on the court that plays well under pressure, but it is the guy or the woman that manages themselves well and makes great choices. I can't get any smarter, but I can become a better decision maker. Yep. Becoming a better decision maker involves, as Doug mentioned, me using my values, that's moral competence, and me managing my emotions, that's emotional competence. And we can get better at both of those things.
Yes. And I will say, I'm a huge Patrick Mahomes fan, not a huge Taylor Swift fan, for the record. And he's both. He's talented and he's so composed under pressure. Mm-hmm. Like right. When there were 9 seconds left on the clock, I was still, he's going to pull it off. He's going to pull it off. And sure enough, they scored that touchdown with 2 seconds left in the game. And I was screaming with joy. Sorry to you San Francisco fans. I do have empathy for them because what a heartbreaker.
Yeah, it was a great.
Yeah, keep in mind, we're 0-4 in Minnesota Super Bowl, so we're 0-4. Yeah. So, but I've been to a Super Bowl to watch Denver win, so I've done that.
Oh, well, it was so great being a Denver fan back in the day when we had Peyton Manning, that's for sure. Yeah. Wish they could recover to half that level of winning, but I digress. I want to thank you, gentlemen, for joining me on the show today. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. Leadershifters, for those of you who weren't listening from the beginning, I wrote down so many things, but there are just a few words of wisdom that I want to reshare. Look for the goodness and the potential in people. Make their ideal real, which I know is your tagline, but it's genius. Make stupid optional. Back to the importance of decision-making. Don't skip self-mastery. Just because you have technical skill does not mean you have leadership skill. That and many more gems dropped today. The book, Don't Wait for Someone Else to Fix It, 8 Essentials to Enhance Your Leadership Impact at Work, Home, and Anywhere Else That Needs You. The link to the book will be in the show notes, as will the link to the values card exercise. Become one of the more than 120,000 people in 146 countries that have completed that exercise.
Shani, thanks. You did a great job. Thanks for having us.
We have to make you our permanent podcast host.
Happy to. It's what when I was a kid, I wanted to be the next Barbara Walters. I wanted to be a broadcast journalist, and somehow I ended up in finance, like you gentlemen. So starting the podcast was a little bit of fulfilling a childhood dream.
Yeah, well, good. You did a great job.
Really fantastic. It's been wonderful. Again. Thank you so much.
And Leadershifters, until next time. Thank you for listening to today's episode. Go to theleadershiftproject.com to sign up for the Scoop newsletter and explore all the resources from this podcast in the show notes. And follow me on Instagram at The Leadership Project and LinkedIn under my name, Shani Magoski, for inspiration and content about all things leadership. Make it a great day.